I know what you're thinking, punk. You're thinking, did he fire 6 shots or only 5? And then to tell you the truth, I forgot myself in all this excitement. But being this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and will blow your head clean off, you've got to ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Welcome to Filmstrip, featuring Ron.
It'll be my word against yours.
And Jay.
I got to know.
These podcasts will be spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes.
Welcome to Filmstrip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Ron.
This is our review of Dirty Harry, starring Clint Eastwood, Andrew Robinson, Harry Gardino, Rainey Santonio, and John Vernon. Directed by Don Siegel. Released in 1971 on a budget of $4 million. Grossed $35.6 million at the box office and launched a franchise that spanned for nearly 20 years. And, you know, I looked at it before we got to talking here, recording this, Ron, and this is now officially the oldest movie we've ever reviewed on Filmstrip. And it's also the series that spans, well, no, outside of Star Wars, it spans the longest time of being relatively continuous. If you take that long break between 83 and 99 when Star Wars was on break, that one holds the record there for us. But 1971 to 1989, the Dirty Harry films. And I have always been oddly fascinated with these and wanted to take a crack at them. And I remember watching these on cable growing up. They were on like TNT and TBS and stuff all the time. And I think I even wound up going to see the Deadpool. I snuck into it at a theater or something in 1989. And oh, wow. Yeah, it's long. Yes, sorry, Carmike Cinemas in Florence, but whatever I bought a ticket to got an extra $3 that day because I saw the Deadpool. But yeah, you know, I've always been kind of fascinated with the Dirty Harry thing, and I think it's every Southern male that was ever remotely into shooting guns. You know, it was all the 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world. It's all built around that line and the whole "go make my day" and all that stuff. So I wanted to come back and do this series, and you know, was looking for an excuse and said, hey, you know what, this spring, good time to throw in some Dirty Harry before we get into stuff like Mad Max and some of the other things we're going to do this summer. This felt like a good dovetail
before we get into the classy films.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what's your background on Dirty Harry?
Actually, I don't think I have a lot of background on Dirty Harry, except my grandmother used to keep a .357 Magnum under her couch. That's about all I got. I mean, I've seen them all on cable, you know, lots of times, and I know the iconic lines and all that stuff. But I think the thing I recognize Dirty Harry the most for is all the parts where it's been ripped off in other things or made fun of in other things.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about this series is that it had such an influence, and then it became the thing that was the caricature that has been overdone. And I don't know that we could ever even have this again, right? But it's definitely has its moment in cinema history.
Yeah, I don't think there's a big demand these days for lone white cop shooting first and asking questions never.
Yes, that is absolutely true. And not to make light of serious situations, but you're exactly right. Yeah, this would not play today. I wrote an article years ago on Blog Critics about films I thought needed a remake or a reboot. And I threw this one out there. And I think my idea was like Timothy Olyphant or Ryan Reynolds as Dirty Harry. But then I even in my own writing, I said, but I don't know that you could pull it off. Like, it would have to be a period piece almost, because no one would go for this.
It's very much like it's very much a product of that late 60s, early 70s urban blight. Crime is out of control, you know, but before crack came around and made things super dangerous.
Yeah.
In the big cities, it definitely feels like, oh, well, there's no way this could take place now. This had to, the 70s was the time that this was meant to take place.
Exactly. It is a product of the 70s, particularly this story, and we'll talk about its aping of what is happening in real life at the time, and then what it influenced in cinema and beyond as we get into it here. But yeah, I do think this is a film that is very much a snapshot of its time. And I will say this though, what has always attracted me to this beyond the banal things of being a child and a kid that thought guns were cool and stuff like that, was Clint Eastwood. I grew up on spaghetti westerns. My dad's a big fan of all of those. So I've seen all of them. I've seen everything Clint did. And so Clint as a cop always seemed to be like, yeah, the next evolution. This is, the man with no name ultimately got married and had a lot of children, or maybe he just had a few along the way. And through his descendants out west, one of them ended up being an inspector in San Francisco. I mean, it's kind of the same thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Then it becomes like its own metaverse, like the dirty with no name metaverse or whatever.
Yeah, there is a good subreddit to be started on that. I'm just going to go ahead and say that needs to happen at the end of this series, maybe. But you know what? Let's get into the film though and talk about Dirty Harry, because this is so old. I bet there's a lot of people in our audience that haven't seen this or don't really know what it's about and wouldn't remember it unless they had, again, been exposed to it by us. So I'm going to go through, do a quick plot summary, and then we can talk about the movie. So Dirty Harry Callahan, as he's known, is a hard-edged San Francisco inspector who seemingly can't even finish lunch without foiling a bank robbery with his classic .44 Magnum handgun. And when a psychotic calling himself Scorpio goes on a killing spree, Harry and his new partner Chico are assigned to hunt him down under the watchful and critical eyes of their lieutenant and the mayor. Callahan catches the killer, but ignores his own rights and sees him released on technicalities. And on release, Scorpio kidnaps a busload of children and demands a ransom. The mayor goes along with the game and orders Callahan not to interfere, but disgusted, Harry intercepts the bus, takes out Scorpio for good, and tosses his badge away as credits roll. And that's kind of the short version of what happens here, and I want to get into it in a little more detail with you. But the thing that gets me about this film from the outset is the entire motif of it. There's something about 70s films that they all, and it's not just the grainy film, they have a look and a feel, from the soundtrack to the cinematography to just the way the characters walk around and are staged, that is unique to that era of cinema.
Well, it doesn't hurt the fact that the soundtrack is done by the great Lalo Schifrin, who did the soundtrack to Bullet.
Yes.
And it's a great, orchestral funk kind of soundtrack.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Orchestral funk, having that kind of I don't know how to, just have a real neat feel to it. Like, I always remember the original Rocky had this weird kind of jazzy, funky orchestra, soundtrack to it and stuff. But the other thing is Don Siegel, the director here. I mean, having done things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956, which is one of my favorite films of all time, to stuff like Escape from Alcatraz, The Shootist. I mean, this guy, did a lot of good movies and directed a lot of really cool stuff. Everything from some of those spaghetti western types up through, things like Dirty Harry. Now, he has a real touch with the camera that is unique, and I think it gives it a real style. It's just cool.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of moments in the film where I was like, man, that is a really cool shot. The helicopter shot towards the end when in the middle when Callahan catches the guy in the old what looks like to be the old Oakland Alameda old Raiders football stadium. That's a great shot. I love the way it just pulls back, but it just pulls back and it keeps pulling back, and it's kind of a seamless pan out, or I guess it would be a zoom out, because it can't pan in a helicopter.
Yeah, well, you can bank, but I don't know that you can pan. Good point. I think we got to talk too, though, about San Francisco, because it's as much a character in this film and really in this series as anything else. And you mentioned Bullet in there. I got a lot of Bullet off of this too, and then also going forward, I got a lot of Death Wish in this too. I think those three films have a kinship to them, that they kind of all exist in the same universe in some ways.
Yeah, that's a thing I made in my notes. I said Dirty Harry is the connector between Bullet and Death Wish, just from the score, but also stylistically. Bullet is a cop who's doing things his own way. Dirty Harry takes that even farther, and then good old Charles Bronson isn't even a cop. He's just like
he's an architect whose family.
He's an architect
attacked.
with.
Yeah.
He's an architect out for vengeance with a giant handgun.
Exactly. Yeah. The thing to me that always intrigued me about this film, and it's one of those things that draws me into it, is this is really Bullet before, and then like the French Connection and stuff. Those are the birth of the anti-hero. Death Wish is in there too, right? I mean, it's the 70s anti-hero is so prevalent here, and that's what Dirty Harry is. I mean, he's doing what you feel like, we need to have this done. You got to have somebody out there that will just take the things in his own hands, but he's a lawman too, and even he struggles with the idea that he has to go beyond what maybe he has to go beyond what is legal to be able to get the job done.
It's a really interesting take. I just gotta wonder. I mean, I wasn't alive for any of the 70s, so I don't know. But I just gotta wonder what was in America, what was going on in America at that time to make this like everyone's wish fulfillment figure.
Well, I wasn't alive for a lot of it. Only the last few years of it, but I haven't seen a lot of the cinema and listened to a lot of discussion about it. It was post Vietnam. That was happening. Matter of fact, Vietnam wasn't even over at this point. You had that. You had coming up. You would have Watergate, but you already had distrust of the government. You'd had Kent State. You'd had all the civil rights action in the South in the 60s. You're coming off the heels of that. You also had mass inflation. You had trouble in Iran. You had this, that. I mean, it was a lot of things. So there was no bright side. I mean, you had gas shortages and all this other stuff. That it's one of the things that made Star Wars such a hit was because it was such an escape from how sucky everything was, and it was also right there at the time when all of that went away too. But I think Dirty Harry is definitely a part of all of that, and the way it can exist is because it's what people lived every day back then. I mean, I remember talking to my dad a lot about this when you're watching this movie growing up, and he said, "Oh yeah, it was horrible." He said, "This is just how people felt, though."
So it's kind of like the world is out of control. We need some way to control it.
Yeah, and sometimes that has to be someone that goes above and beyond. It's the man with no name again. That whole convention.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The thing is, though, we don't even meet Harry for a while here. We open up with our killer, Scorpio, Andrew Robinson. Now, I know him. He's done a ton of television. I think he's been on every show in the world. But I kind of always know him as two things. He was the dad in the original Hellraiser, if you've ever seen that.
Oh, yes.
Yes. He has some iconic lines in there, "Come to Daddy," and all that kind of stuff. And then he was also another cop. Oddly enough, Rainey Santonio was in this one too. A little Sylvester Stallone joint in the 80s called Cobra, where he's the uptight cop.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, Cobra.
Yeah,
that's another great flick of the time period.
Yes, it is, and that's another Golden Globus joint too. I think that's probably on our short list somewhere down the line.
Oh yeah,
to get into that. But I know him from that, And the thing is to hear him talk, he was like the biggest peacenik hippie they could find. So he's totally cast against type to play this Zodiac ripoff. I mean, that's what this is, right? This guy is supposed to be like the Zodiac killer, which that was very much a part of the times.
Yeah, it's a flavor. It's like Zodiac mixed with what's that guy's name?
Charles Manson.
Charles Manson mixed with Charles Whitman.
Yes, it's Charles. Yes, Charles Whitman, Manson, Zodiac, all of that. Particularly the taunting of the police. I think that's the Zodiac part, and also why they go with the Scorpio line. And what's funny about that is that all of this was initially concocted as a Frank Sinatra joint. Can you imagine that as Sinatra as Callahan?
No, not at all.
Yeah,
that's definitely would have been a terrible casting decision.
Yeah, I mean they went from like Sinatra to like Robert Mitchum and Burt Lancaster, who both turned it down, and then they ultimately ended up with Clint doing it. And
now Robert Mitchum, I could see that.
Yeah, Mitchum, I could see it. Apparently, he thought it was a piece of trash, so like he hated it. And I mean, think about it from their point of view. The dialogue in this movie is abhorrent. I mean, even for the 70s, it's terrible. I mean, just the awful things people say to each other and the way it's all staged and just the very clinical nudity. Like, it's not titillating. It's very like sickening the way that it's played here and stuff. And it would be, I can see why respected actors would go, yeah, I ain't doing that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that too. But like as I was watching the film, because it's been a long time since I've actually sat down and watched Dirty Harry. As I was watching it, I kept noticing. Well, this is the part of the film where Cannon would insert some nudity.
Yeah.
So I mean, as much as clinical as the nudity there was plenty of opportunity for titillation that they refused to take. Mm-hmm. And I actually like that it's not necessarily there for fun.
Right, yeah. I think that's what makes it different. Is it's not there for fun. It's not even the opening scene. The girl in the swimming pool. I mean, she's clothed, but that's very alluring and stuff. And I mean, she just gets shot through the back. I mean, that we open up to that scope shot and all that. I mean, again, it's another one of those grand shots, and it's really disturbing. I mean, you open up with that and you see Callahan.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that. Yeah, I think that's the thing that makes the film work. It stays so detached from everything, not Callahan. Mm-hmm. The rot is inherent. The rot goes all the way to the core.
Yeah, exactly.
So to speak. The way the cops talk about the victims, the way the legal system lets them go, all that stuff.
Oh yeah, look, it's just this. What am I trying to say? This crumbling empire from the inside out. Like you can see why a killer like this could rise in this area in the city, and the mayor has no backbone. And I love though that they are reluctant to give Callahan the case and all they do is allure to some kind of a shooting of a naked man with a butcher wife chasing a woman the year before. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that sounded like a good story. And
that's funny because it made me think of the scene in the original Naked Gun where Leslie Nielsen is talking to the mayor.
Yeah, I think that's what the Naked Gun is ripping off, actually.
Oh, I know it is.
Yeah, but no, you're right. But when we really meet Callahan in full is he's trying to eat lunch at a local diner, and a bank robbery breaks out at his, right over his shoulder. And I mean, almost without thinking about it, he just turns around and pulls out that cannon and start shooting the suspects.
Yeah, who are not like standing away from everyone. They're in a crowd of people.
Yeah, he is firing off that very loud weapon in broad daylight. I mean, again, this is something that you could never imagine these days, right? And then that iconic scene where he's got one down and he's like, the whole bit about, did they fire 6 times or 5? Do you feel lucky? And he's holding that gun on him. And what's even better is at the end of it is that, the guy gives up basically. And he says, wait a minute, I got to know, and as it turns out, he fired 6 times. So, well, let's talk about the 44 Magnum though, because if San Francisco's a character in a Dirty Harry movie, that gun is a character in a Dirty Harry movie. There's something about it though that is just perfect for like the 70s machismo, right? I mean, it is the ultimate man, and the ultimate man's weapon would be a gun that could, quote, blow your head clean off. Mm-hmm. And it's almost overkill, right? Because why on earth would anyone have to carry one of those around? Every other cop in this movie, it should be noted, is carrying like a .38 snub-nose revolver, which is standard detective issue stuff for that time. Callahan, on the other hand, is literally carrying a cannon.
Yeah, they've all got like the Colt Police Positive, the detective special, mm-hmm. and he's got the gun he would hand down to his son, Rick Grimes.
I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, I don't know. I like the whole scene though, the action scene, and I think 70s action scenes, man. There's nothing like them, right? Because it was all practical effects. You got cars crashing through windows. You've got red paint for blood, which is hilarious when you see it splattering across things, and breaking glass. I think breaking glass is a trope of the 70s. Like you want to show violence, it's breaking glass.
Well, I think it ties back to the broken window theory of urban decay.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Or I'm just reading way too much into this movie.
No, I think it's there to read. Honestly, I don't think Siegel and Eastwood were trying to make a pulp knockoff. I think they saw something in this that was worth treating with a little bit of respect. Now, whether the series stays there or not, we'll get there in the next films. But this one in particular, the first one, I think it takes itself very seriously, and it wants you to take it seriously too. It's easy to look at it now and kind of go, "Oh gosh, can you imagine that could even happen today?" But if you just sit back and watch it and just absorb it, it washes over you pretty cleanly. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell what they're getting after here.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie that's got some stuff going on under the surface, and it definitely is very careful to not go for the dumb pleasure aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even they do some fun things I noticed with the sound design, and with the score. The score is great. It's very tense and very propulsive, but they also know when to not have any music at all. Like during the chase scene through the stadium, it's just the sound of like labored breathing and footfalls and gunshots. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it puts you in that moment. Like you say, when they have him running around the city later on or whatever, and you hit that on right too. It was the home of the 49ers and the Oakland Raiders, for a while, old Kazar Stadium. When they have them doing all of that, it vacillates between you've got music to get you from point to point, but when they're in the scene and the scenery, it's just the sound of the men running after each other, which I think is fantastic. And it's part of using the city as your landscape. Michael Mann does this with L.A. a lot in his films. Uses the landscape as part of the story and the characters. And we talked about that with Heat. And I think this one is just part of it. It comes from this tradition, the filmmakers that could use the places they were as part of it. I mean, what does everybody remember about Bullet, right? The fastback Mustang and that chase through the streets, right? Yes, it's all part of that, and they do some of that here too, right? So, what do you make of the rookie partner here, though, Rainey Santoni, the Chico Gonzalez character?
I mean, aside from the terrible name.
Well, yeah, it is an awful name. So.
It's definitely feels like a 70s diversity name written by people who didn't really know much about Hispanics. But I like the actor.
Yeah.
I think he's good for the part, and I like that there's a level-headed companion to Dirty Harry.
And this is something, I'm glad you caught that. This is something that is going to reoccur throughout the series. This idea of pairing Callahan up with somebody that can balance him out. I mean, they'll do this in every film, except for one of them, where they go out of their way to pair him up with somebody to try to get him. And in this case, it's this guy's fresh out of college, and he's a police officer, but he's a sociologist, and he's the younger Vincent Hanna. Is what he is. He's just young and inexperienced, but he's smart. As where Harry is street smart, right?
Yeah, to me it kind of reads like a commentary on America's changing workforce. Mm-hmm. I guess you could say. Like, I mean, Dirty Harry didn't go to college.
No.
Dirty Harry probably barely got out of high school.
Yeah. You never get a lot of Callahan's background, but I always took him as this guy that probably was, dropped out, got his GED or something, or maybe just got through high school long enough and joined the army because it was either that or go to jail, and he wound up fighting in Korea or something, and then came back and became a cop because that was better than lugging boxes on the dock, that kind of guy.
Yeah, and this guy is educated, he's stable, he's got his college degree. He's
got a wife.
Wife and a
He's starting a family. Yeah, that's the thing, that we do get a great scene, and it's near the end of the film. It's after Chico gets hurt and is basically convalescing and has decided to leave the force and just go teach, that his wife is having this whole conversation with Callahan, and Callahan reveals that I was married, and the next thing out of his mouth I thought was going to be, but my wife couldn't take it and left me. But we find out that no, his wife died in a car wreck. And it was a car accident, and it jaded him in a very serious way. And I think that adds another layer to the character, because the thing about Dirty Harry is that most people know when you say Dirty Harry is the caricature, the gun, the cheesy lines, all that stuff, right? But in this first film, he's very much a real person that has a real attitude about things and is doing what he considers to be the best job possible.
Right. Yeah, and without letting the entanglements of the system get in his way.
Right. Because he's at a time when, like we said, the system is so corrupt that he can get away with doing things like this, right?
Yeah, he's definitely doing things his own way. I mean, it's kind of the detective it's the source of the detective who plays by his own rules to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think without Dirty Harry and Chico, you wouldn't have Riggs and Murtaugh.
No, exactly. No, you would never have Riggs and Murtaugh. You would never have Miami Vice. You know, none of that stuff. You've got to have the archetype of that. And so the idea of these two odd couple, if you will, as the cops, but the fact that Chico actually brings something to the table. He seems to get what Harry's like. I mean, and having to deal with it. They have to do this whole bit where they talk somebody off the roof and all this stuff, right? And there's this running gag of like, now you know why they call him Dirty Harry. Is he gets every bad job in the force, and that's Martin Riggs all the way, right? I mean, that was his whole character in Lethal Weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What'd you make of Scorpio now, though? Because we got to talk about that dude.
He's a very strange villain. As far as villains go, I couldn't tell if he was supposed to be clearly he's mentally ill. Yeah. Or there's some sort of mental illness or like a drug problem or something going on there. But I couldn't make if he was supposed to be like a hippie gone bad, like a Charles Manson type, or just a nut with longish hair. I think he's just a nut with the hair, honestly. The way I've always read him, and I think it's the way Robinson plays him too, is that he only lives for the thrill of the mayhem and the kill. Like, he does this whole ransom bit, but the way he lays that out for the cops and stuff, it's the most impossible terms. Like, I don't think he ever cares if they give him the money or not. He just wants to get them scrambling so he can go shoot another, black person or a Catholic priest or whatever he says, right? I mean, he's just there for the mayhem. Definitely kind of resonates in the performance. It kind of makes me think of the crazy the bad guy from The Warriors. The guy who clinks the bottles together. Yeah. I don't know if it's just the hair or just the kind of deranged laughter that they both undertake at certain points of the film. That's a great. I hadn't thought about that, but that's an excellent point. And those are definitely films of the same ilk. Yeah, it's clearly that guy's. It's clearly Scorpio's son. Yeah, that's Scorpio's kid. He just made it all the way to New York. So no, I like the Scorpio character though as a bad guy, like I said, because it's very easy that this could have just been like giving no lines and he just shoots people and he talks on the phone and it's very just blah, right? But there's so many layers to him because we get to see him in so many places. Like, he gets to walk around. We see him later on. He does this whole like robbery of a liquor store where he's talking to the guy, and he does this thing to set up Callahan too, where he chases Gonzalez and he ends up wounding him along the way. And I think the most evil thing is that he's a multi-layered killer. He's not just a shooter. He kidnaps a girl and he sends in part of her clothes and he demands a ransom and buries her alive, and she ends up dying because they don't get to her in time. And I mean, he's a sadist all the way. He overtakes a bus of school children, which brought me back to Invasion USA, by the way, and that whole scene. But I mean, it's like every bad thing this guy could possibly do, he does. But then there's moments like with the school bus thing, he's got the bus driver on the phone and this little girl tries to get off. He's like, "Not now, honey," and he puts her back on the bus and he's sing "Row, row, row your boat" while I'm about to blow your head off, and beating that one kid for wanting his mother. And I mean, he's messed up. He's like the Joker's grandfather almost. I think I really like that the character's not just evil all of the time, but in a way he is evil all of the time. He just knows how to put on the front.
Yeah. It's like he's always bad. He's just degrees of it that get worse and worse. And I'm with you too. The mental health angle. I think that's also what they're playing up here. And this is in a time when we knew so much less about mental health and mental illness than we do now. That this person would have been written off, and for all kinds of different reasons. By society and by everyone else. And the thing I think is most interesting about him is we never get his entire backstory. It is a mystery to how he got to this point. When we meet him, he's shooting people on the rooftop. We don't ever get him crying about, where he came from and all this. And you can't trust anything he ever says either because he lies so much.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a very unsettling take on the character. I like that. Yeah, like you said, I like that we don't get his backstory, and that his backstory doesn't even really matter.
No, I mean the only thing they ever even get, Callahan breaks into his apartment to search it, but they can't use any of it because it was done without a warrant. We find out later, and so I mean we know nothing about this guy except that he will go to the extreme to get what he wants. And I think the best example of that is when he pays the guy to beat him up so he can frame it on Callahan. That I was like, there are people that you can just pay to beat the crap out of you.
Apparently so.
I mean, it's like they had like an arranged meeting. I thought he's there to buy a gun. He's going to buy drugs. I'd forgotten about this, and he's like, "No, I want you to beat the crap out of me." Okay.
That was a very fun scene because I enjoyed that the guy was reticent to do it until he started with the insults.
Yeah, exactly. He started talking trash about him and all this stuff, and it works out that one expletive with like 12 extra syllables and that stuff. I mean, it's really weird. I mean, but again, it's all to set Harry up, because the point is, and what we've got to get to here and talk about is that we're working up to a final scene. Is that Callahan has played along and done what he's been asked to do. They've been on several stakeouts. He chased him once across the stadium and shot him. And when he couldn't get him to confess, the guy's sitting there and crying just the weirdest cry ever I've ever seen out of a male actor. Begging for it. And Callahan steps on his bloody leg, to try to get him to confess, to tell him where the girl is. That's all the impetus for pushing Harry over the line, where he realizes I'm not going to be able to use conventional ways to get to this guy. Yeah,
because clearly this guy is not going to – he's not going to fall for a good cop, bad cop.
No, not at all. I mean, no interrogation can work. And it is Callahan that he seems to be fixated upon. And I wanted to ask you, is it because he sees in Callahan like a good adversary that he's into this cat and mouse with him, because he knows this guy will go above and beyond to try to get him?
I think so. That's how I kept that's how I kind of read it. It's pretty clear that Callahan may not have the college degree, but he's clever.
Oh, big time. Yeah,
he's definitely, clever enough to be a match for this guy, both mentally and in terms of his propensity for violence.
Yeah. He'll definitely ratchet it up a little bit. So, and that's the thing, is that they finally get to the point where Callahan, now has been ordered, you've got to stop following this guy. You've got to leave him alone and let it go, And we see Scorpio steal the gun from the liquor store, and then he kidnaps the bus load of children and demands another ransom and to have a plane so he can leave the country. And the mayor, of course, plays along with this. And they've already asked Callahan before to be the delivery man on this. And this time he says, no, I'm not doing it. And I wondered what you thought of that, because I think it was at that point he realized, I'm tired of playing games with these people. I'm just going to go shoot this guy, and y'all can deal with me later.
That's a lot of how I read it as well. I read it as, that's like, well, you tried this game once, we did it your way, and your way failed. Now it's time to do it my way.
Yeah, exactly. And what is great to me is that Scorpio's on this bus, and this is a great scene on the bus. He's got the bus driver driving, he's got the kids singing "Row, row, row your boat," and he's, of course, going crazy on them and all this stuff. And as they they turn off the interstate and the freeway, and standing on this wood bridge is Harry Callahan in his best man with no name pose. Like, all I needed was one of those Leone music cues right there.
the rattle of that jawbone thing or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, doing that because he's just standing there in his cop suit with his sunglasses, just like coming this way or whatever. It's like there's only so much rope on the end of this for you, or whatever it is, and he jumps off the bridge on top of the bus in this great scene. That's another one of these great action scenes, things I miss, in today, because all that today would be CGI, and some of that works well enough, but there's nothing like seeing a guy actually jump on the bus and ride it.
It's not just a guy. That was Clint Eastwood.
And that's the other thing. Yeah, it's actually Clint. Like that's Clint at this time was, I think he was in his 40s. So
he was like 41 or 42. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean he's not a spring chicken now by any means, but he certainly wasn't then. And he just jumped right on the bus, like, yeah, whatever. And I love though that they had this whole scene where Scorpio's shooting at him through the roof, and ultimately the thing crashes, and they have another great chase scene through the rock quarry. And it's the best example too, outside of that night scene, of the chase where there's no music, where it's just the feet and the men breaking around the different ends.
There's just something really like pulse pounding, I guess, about that the way they filmed that, about the lack of the use of sound. It's like it takes it from just being like, oh, a movie chase, like here's some Waka Jawaka music in the background, to like,
yeah, go ahead,
to like actually chasing someone or being chased by someone.
Well, it puts the audience in the chase scene is what it does, because it's what it would feel like and sound like, and how you would feel as you're chasing someone. It puts you on the edge of your seat to make you run. And you got to think back in the 70s too. This wasn't something that you saw every day on your local television show. Now you turn on television, it's twice as exciting as some of the action scenes you see in movies, right? Well, there wasn't any of that in this time. You didn't get that. I mean, the action scenes didn't pass for this at that moment. So I don't know. It gives it a real beat and a pace that ratchets up the tension, because at any time around any corner could be one of them ready to shoot the other one. That's the thing, is they stop long enough to shoot at each other every now and then.
Yeah, it's definitely a running gun battle, and it's one of my favorite parts of the movie, I think. Yeah, just because it's executed so well, but it's not overdone, I guess you could say. Absolutely, and it builds to a real crescendo on the pier when Scorpio grabs the kid and has the gun, pointed at his head, and is, threatening to shoot him. And I love how Callahan stands there and then like gets a round off and hits him in the shoulder so the kid can run away and Scorpio's down. I would have never thought. I was like, man, you talk about gutsy at this point. He's just decided to go ahead and shoot the hostage. I mean. Well, I mean, with that 44 Magnum, he ought to be able to put one through a child into an adult if he really had to. I think he whizzed it by the kid, but yeah, sure. But he pretty well. That was the one thing that took me out of the movie earlier, except for the fact that Scorpio spends the rest of the movie with a limp. Where he got shot in the leg. Yeah, he gets stabbed and shot in the leg the same night. Yeah. Yeah, well, I was just thinking, if you really shot him in the leg with that 44 Magnum, there wouldn't be a ton of meat left. Yeah, unless he just grazed him good. I mean, we're never really told how good he got him. You're right. So, but granted, he shot him from 50 yards away when he shot him. I mean, the second time, he's maybe 10 feet away from him, it's a wonder he didn't spin him off the dock at that point. But they had their final showdown, and it's a refrain to that earlier one with the bank robbery. The whole, I kind of lost count and all the excitement myself, and all this stuff, and you got to ask yourself, are you lucky? And what's different about this one though, and I love the way Clint plays it, and now it's parodied to death, and it's kind of sad, but you watch it in its context. The first time he says that, he's being a smartass to a guy he's got the drop on. This time, the way he's saying it and he's gritting his teeth and all this stuff, like he's pissed. He's like, please let me pull the trigger. Dare me one time, and I like the difference in the performance of the mirror of that, but how it is ramped up at the end here for Callahan. Like it's personal. don't think Clint gets enough credit for being as good of an actor as he is.
Oh, I agree.
Because, I mean, he's great in this movie. Like, it's not nearly as flat as it could have been in The Wrong Hands. Like, it's not nearly as one-dimensional of a character, you know?
Yeah.
There's definitely, I mean, like we said, with the film having more going on than what's on the surface, there's more, I don't know, pain or something, helplessness, frustration going on under the surface of, you know, this character who could very easily become the Death Wish killing machine.
Well, he could become the Terminator. He could become anything that just Rambo, you know, any of the 80s tropes, just this walk in and mow the room down kind of person, which is, you know, is the caricature of Dirty Harry in popular culture. But this film, that's not what he is at all. He's got a lot of heart. And he's also, he's human enough to allow himself to be pissed off in the moment. You know, and Scorpio has nothing to say. He just reaches for the gun. And my question to you was, you know, all the times he had gotten the drop on Callahan, had been able to get out of it, did he know I might as well go for the gun anyway because he's going to shoot me no matter what I do? Or was he actually thinking he could get out of it one more time?
I think you could definitely say that he thought he was going to get away one more time. I mean, even knowing that this guy has got a hand cannon, you know, 3 feet away from your face, there's always that chance that maybe he did fire 6 shots.
Yep.
You know, maybe you've got that, or maybe he just realized that there was no better ending for him. You've got the choice of die a villain or become, you know, just another dude in prison.
Exactly. And you know what I love, though, and it's subtle in this, but what you realize is that Callahan knows the answer to that question both times he asks it. He knows he's out of bullets at the bank, but he's just daring the guy. You know, do you really want to take a chance on this? And then this time he knows he's got one left. And he's, you know, because he's like, I fired 4, I just put one in his shoulder, I know I got one left. You know, and he already knows the answer to it. And the thing is, though, the way it's played in the film is there's so much gunfire back and forth, and the way they work the echoes, because there's no way a P-38 and a 44 sound anything alike. But in a place where sound reverberates differently, maybe you couldn't tell who was shooting what, because that P-38's got 8 in it. And so, you know, so you're like, wait a minute, who shot when? You know, it is confusing, and I love that for the audience. If you've never seen it, you don't know. Does he really have another one? But of course, what you know is Callahan knows he's got another bullet, and he puts it square in the middle of his chest and blows him off the dock. And it's a great death scene too. I mean, he doesn't just sink into the water; he kind of floats there, and you watch him die in the water. It's really harrowing in some ways, but it's, like you said, it's the perfect ending for that character.
Yeah, it's definitely a very intense death scene. The one thing you can say is that they don't pull any punches with the demise. It's not a neat, clean hero victory scene.
Yeah, no, you know it's not, because the cops are on their way, you know, and he knows, you know, what's going to happen to him as a result of his actions. That's why he throws the badge in the water at the end, I think, is because he knows, no, so much for that, right? Because, I mean, there's no way he can go back after that.
Right. Well, that was a whole thing that I was reading in the background, because I went and dug into the background of the movie again. And it was a whole thing of discussion between him and the director about just how they would end and what that ended up meaning. And now I've lost it, of course.
Well, what did you read it as? How did you read the ending?
I read it as him realizing that how I read it was he realized that he had gone beyond the law, that there were limits to the power that badge had for him, that it was still something that, you know, I didn't read it as him renouncing his job or renouncing even the thing of justice. I read it as him casting off the system. In a sense. I
agree with that, and it's why I'm surprised in these later sequels he's still an inspector with the SFPD. I always thought this would be like, you know, when Shaft became the Private Eye, or this would be when Dirty Harry became, his own boss, essentially. And that'd be interesting to re-explore, because I don't remember if in the subsequent films if they explain how the heck he still has a job and why he's still given a pretty long leash with a lot of it. So, but
he gets results.
Yeah, this is true. This is true, and times do change, but we'll talk about those in the subsequent sequels. We're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, popcorn ratings. So, Ron, what are yours for Dirty Harry?
I got to say that I got to give it an extra large popcorn. It holds up way better than I would have expected it to hold up, especially after, 40 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 40 years or more. I mean, it doesn't fall into the trap of being slow like a lot of movies from the 70s would be. I think it's still early enough style-wise that it's not, it's not going to be like a 2.5 hour kind of slog. Mm-hmm. It does move slower than a modern action movie does, but I think that only makes it more effective when it picks up that pace. Mm. Like it's steady, and I think there's just an intelligence, and I think there's a reason that it has inspired so many other films. Why it kicked off a whole genre in Italy. They call them the Polischetti films, where they're basically the spaghetti western, Dirty Harry, kind of a forerunner to Giallo. And I think that's it's just a really good example of why Clint Eastwood was for the longest time one of the biggest movie stars in the world, without being, one of the glamorous sorts, and why he took over the John Wayne kind of man's man mantle.
I don't disagree with anything you just said, and I think you really summed it up in the bit about how well this holds up. This movie is 44 years old at the time we're recording and releasing this podcast, and there are some films you go back 44 years and you can feel them. And this one, though, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like a timepiece of its era for sure, but the music, the cinematography, and the acting, it's not just Eastwood, it's everybody here, but particularly Eastwood leads this cast on a tour de force, and it is an amazing thing to watch and be a part of. And it's something that I think needs to be seen. If you're a cinema buff, particularly if you like heist and crime films and stuff like that, if you're a Michael Mann fan, if you're into, Heat and that kind of stuff that we talked about earlier this year, and you haven't seen Dirty Harry or haven't watched it in a while, you owe it to yourself to watch it. It is one of those that needs to be seen. And so I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, it definitely lives on in Michael Mann, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Especially Heat.
Yeah, big time. I mean, you could say, but if you're a fan of like Nolan and things like that, and the way he does things like Inception and some of that stuff in Dark Knight, you will dig this movie. It's definitely for you. So check it out. It's totally worth it. And extra large popcorn for me as well. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how well this goes as we go down this series. I don't have particularly strong memories of what is to come in the lines. There's one of them that really stands out in my head, and it's the fourth one. It's not the fifth one. Oddly enough, it's not the one I snuck into the theaters for. But I don't know what is coming with Magnum Force, in particular the next one. I'm curious to get back into that one. It's been a long time since I've watched it. But they turned around in 2 years and put another one out because they knew they had a hit on their hands, and I can see why. I can see why people went for this at the time and why people still go for it today for sure. Folks, thanks for joining us in this latest episode of Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com. You can find links to our social media pages there. Leave us a review on iTunes. Let us know what you think of the show and what you think of this particular episode. If you agree with us, disagree with us, always appreciate interacting with you and appreciate your support. Until next time, for Ron, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of their respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504C2, Title 17.